Welcome back to the VybeShift Podcast. On Monday, we began exploring a recognition that quietly affects so many high-performing professionals, leaders, caregivers, and people who carry enormous responsibility. I don't know what's important anymore. For many of us, that recognition isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive with a breakdown. It doesn't announce itself with a crisis. Instead, it shows up in a much quieter way. You complete your to-do list, yet somehow feel like nothing meaningful happened. You answer emails, attend meetings, solve problems, take care of everyone else's needs. You stay productive, you stay responsible, you stay dependable. And then at the end of the day, an unsettling question begins to emerge. What did any of that actually matter? That question can be deeply uncomfortable because it challenges something most of us have spent our entire lives believing, that if we simply stay productive enough, eventually we'll feel fulfilled. But what if productivity and importance are not the same thing? What if we become so skilled at doing that we gradually lost touch with being? Today, I want to explore something that is often invisible while we're living it. How we slowly lose our ability to recognize what truly matters. Not because we become careless, but because we become conditioned to give nearly everything the same level of urgency. The quiet equalization of everything. Have you ever noticed what happens when your day begins before you've even had a chance to be present? You wake up. Before your feet even touch the floor, your mind has already begun sorting through responsibilities, the presentation, the patient, the client, the budget, the family schedule, the unread messages, the groceries, the phone call you forgot to return, the appointment you still need to make. Nothing about these things is inherently wrong. Most of them genuinely deserve attention. The problem isn't that your life contains responsibilities. The problem begins when every responsibility starts feeling equally important. When that happens, something subtle arises. Your nervous system loses its ability to distinguish between what it truly is meaningful and what is merely immediate. Everything starts demanding your attention with equal intensity. Every notification feels urgent. Every request feels necessary. Every interruption feels like something you can't ignore. Eventually, your inner experience becomes one long stream of reaction. And when everything feels important, nothing actually feels important anymore. How we slowly lose our inner compass. One of the greatest misconceptions about clarity is that we believe it's something we need to create. We say things like, I just need to figure things out. I need to get my priorities straight. I need to become more organized. Sometimes organization helps, but organization doesn't automatically restore clarity. You can have an exceptionally organized life while feeling profoundly disconnected from what actually matters, because clarity isn't created by better scheduling. Clarity emerges when your attention finally has enough space to notice what has always been quietly important. Think about the last time you stood beside a lake early in the morning. If the surface is constantly disturbed, you can't see very deeply. But when the water becomes still, depth begins revealing itself. Your mind works much the same way. When your attention is constantly pulled from one demand to another, one obligation to another, one notification to another, you don't lose your intelligence, you lose your ability to perceive depth. Everything becomes surface level, even your own life. Busyness creates the illusion of meaning. Here's something I've been noticing, both in my own life and in conversations with others. We often mistake activity for significance. If we're constantly moving, surely we must be moving towards something important. If everyone needs us, surely we must be doing meaningful work. If our calendar is full, surely our life is full. But these aren't the same thing. A full calendar does not necessarily reflect a full life. Sometimes it reflects something entirely different. A life that has become so crowded with obligation that there's no room left to notice what actually nourishes us. And here's the difficult part. Most of us don't intentionally create this. It happens gradually. One commitment, one expectation, one opportunity, one responsibility, one obligation after another, until one day we realize we become incredibly efficient at maintaining a life we rarely have the opportunity to truly experience. The question beneath the question. So perhaps the real question isn't what's important. Perhaps the deeper question is, when did I stop noticing? Because what matters most is rarely the loudest thing in our lives. Presence isn't loud, connection isn't loud, peace isn't loud, wonder isn't loud. The people we love often aren't asking us to become more productive. They're asking us to become more present. Our own lives aren't asking us to accomplish one more thing before we finally begin living them. They're quietly inviting us to return to this moment, to this conversation, to this breath, to this experience that has been unfolding all along while our attention has been somewhere else. And maybe, just maybe, importance has never been hiding from us. Maybe it's been patiently waiting beneath the noise. End of part 1. Part 2. The life you inherited may not be the life you're experiencing. When importance stops feeling personal. There is something else that quietly happens when we live for long enough inside a life of constant responsibility. We stop asking ourselves whether what we're carrying is actually ours. Instead, we begin asking a different question. Can I carry one more thing? Notice the difference? One question is about alignment. The other is about capacity. Most of us become experts at increasing our capacity. We learn to multitask. We become more efficient. We discover productivity systems. We optimize our calendar. We automate. We delegate. We squeeze another task into an already full day. But very few of us stop to ask, who decided all of this was supposed to matter so much? That's an uncomfortable question, because the answer isn't usually found in one dramatic moment. It's found in thousands of ordinary moments that slowly shape us. The invisible inheritance. Long before we ever created a calendar, we inherited one. Not literally, but psychologically. We inherited ideas about success, ideas about worth, ideas about responsibility, ideas about what a good person does. Perhaps you grew up believing that saying yes made you kind, that sacrificing yourself made you loving, that achievement made you valuable, that being needed gave your life meaning. Or perhaps your profession reinforced these beliefs. Healthcare, education, leadership, business, parenting, service. These are beautiful callings, but every calling carries a shadow. The shadow appears when service quietly becomes self-abandonment, when responsibility becomes identity, when productivity becomes proof that you deserve to rest. Without realizing it, we stop living our lives. We start managing everyone else's expectations. And eventually, we wake up one morning wondering why nothing feels meaningful anymore. The difference between meaning and momentum. Here's something I've noticed. Momentum feels a lot like meaning until you stop moving. Have you ever taken a vacation only to realize you don't actually know how to relax? Your body finally slows down, but your mind doesn't. You begin looking for something productive to do. You feel guilty for sitting. You wonder if you're wasting time. You become restless. Why? Because you've become accustomed to measuring your value by movement. stillness starts feeling uncomfortable. Not because stillness is uncomfortable, but because stillness removes the distractions that have kept us from hearing ourselves. And once the noise quiets, something begins whispering, I'm tired. I miss myself. I don't know what I actually want anymore. Those whispers aren't signs that something is wrong. They're signs that something real is finally being heard. Why we keep choosing the urgent. Here's another paradox. The urgent almost always wins, not because it's more important, but because it speaks louder. Imagine placing two people in a room. One is shouting your name, the other is sitting quietly waiting patiently. Who gets your attention first? Usually the loudest voice. Our lives operate much the same way. Emails shout, notifications shout, deadlines shout, other people's expectations shout. But the deepest parts of ourselves rarely shout. Peace whispers, presence whispers, joy whispers, curiosity whispers, your own inner knowing whispers. And because we've trained ourselves to respond to volume, we often mistake loudness for importance. Over time, we begin living from interruption rather than intention. The cost we rarely measure. There's a cost to this way of living. Not merely stress, not merely exhaustion. Those are visible costs. The hidden cost is something far more profound. We stop experiencing our own lives while we're living them. Think about that for a moment. How many conversations have you been physically present for while mentally rehearsing tomorrow? How many sunsets have you walked past without seeing? How many meals have you finished without tasting? How many moments with someone you love have been partially shared because another part of your attention was somewhere else? This isn't about guilt. This isn't about perfection. This is about recognition. Because we cannot return to an experience we don't first recognize we've been missing. The permission we never knew we needed. Perhaps no one ever gave us permission to live differently. Perhaps no one ever modeled that success could include spaciousness, that accomplishment could coexist with presence, that ambition didn't require abandoning ourselves. Maybe we've been waiting for someone to tell us, you don't have to carry everything. You don't have to respond immediately. You don't have to earn every moment of peace. So today, allow me to offer something that isn't advice. It's an invitation. The next time you feel yourself rushing toward the next obligation, pause. Not for 5 minutes, not for an hour, just long enough to ask one gentle question. Is this truly important, or does it simply feel urgent? Notice that the question doesn't demand an immediate answer. It simply creates space. And sometimes, one moment of genuine space can reveal more clarity than an entire day spent trying to force it. A quiet turning point. If you've been listening today and recognizing yourself in these words, please know this. Losing sight of what matters doesn't mean that you've failed. It doesn't mean that you've become less capable. It doesn't mean you've lost your purpose. More often, it means you've been living inside a system that rewards reaction more than reflection. A system that celebrates busyness more than awareness. A system that rarely asks whether all of this activity is actually leading us to a life that feels deeply lived. But awareness changes something. The moment you begin noticing the difference between urgency and importance, between momentum and meaning, between reaction and intention. Part 3. Clarity was never missing. It was waiting. The search that never ends. Have you ever noticed that we often approach clarity as though it's something we have to go out and to find? We tell ourselves, once this project is finished, once things calm down, once I get caught up, once life becomes less chaotic, Then I'll finally know what's important. But for many of us, that day never arrives because there is always another email, another responsibility, another opportunity, another crisis, another expectation. If our clarity depends upon the world becoming quiet, we may spend our entire lives waiting. What if clarity has never depended on the world becoming quieter? What if it depends upon us becoming more available to the life that already is here? That realization changed something in me because I began to see that I wasn't actually lacking clarity. I was lacking the space to recognize it. What truly matters rarely competes for your attention. Think about the most meaningful moments of your life. Not the busiest, not the most productive, not the most meaningful. Perhaps it was sitting beside someone you love, watching your child laugh, walking through the woods, standing beside the ocean, sharing an honest conversation, holding someone's hand, watching the sunrise, taking a deep breath after months of rushing. Notice something. None of those moments demanded your attention. They simply invited it. The things that matter most rarely force themselves into our awareness. They wait patiently until we finally arrive. Returning to the experience of living. One of the greatest discoveries I've made is this. Life isn't asking us to become better managers of experience. It's inviting us to become participants in it. There's a profound difference. When we're managing life, we're always one step ahead, planning, organizing, preparing, fixing, preventing, optimizing. But when we're experiencing life, we're here. Not because everything is finished, not because every problem has been solved, but because this moment is the only place life has ever actually happened. So much of what we've explored this week comes back to one simple recognition. Importance isn't always something you decide. Sometimes it's something you discover. By giving your full attention to the moment that already is unfolding. A gentle awareness practice. Before we finish today, I'd like to offer you a simple practice. Not another task, not another habit to perfect, just an experiment. Sometime today, pause for 60 seconds. Don't reach for your phone. Don't solve a problem. Don't improve anything. Simply notice. Notice your breathing. Notice the sounds around you. Notice your body. Notice the light. Notice the people near you. Notice the thoughts passing through your mind without chasing them. And then quietly ask yourself, what feels genuinely alive in this moment? Not what should I be doing, not what's next, simply what feels alive. You may be surprised how quickly your inner compass begins responding once you finally give it your attention. This week's recognition. As we close today's episode, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Perhaps you've spent years believing that your greatest challenge was figuring out what mattered. But maybe your greatest challenge has been believing that everything deserves the same amount of your attention. Those are not the same problem. One requires better prioritization, the other requires deeper awareness, and awareness changes everything. Because once you begin noticing where your attention is going, you begin reclaiming the only life you've ever truly had. This one, right here, right now. A brief look ahead. Today we explored what it feels like when everything begins to lose its sense of importance. But this week's Vibrational Stage podcast asks an even deeper question. If you've lost touch with what matters, who or what helped define what was supposed to matter in the first place? Together we'll explore how our identities are quietly shaped by achievement, professional success, family expectations, culture, and inherited beliefs. we'll discover that many of the priorities we've spent years protecting were never consciously chosen. They were absorbed. And beneath those inherited definitions lies something that has never disappeared. Your direct capacity to experience life before it becomes filtered through obligation, performance, or comparison. It's a quieter conversation, a slower conversation. One that doesn't simply help you reorganize your life, but invites you to rediscover the awareness from which a deeply lived life naturally emerges. Why the two podcasts? If you're new to the VybeShift community, you may be wondering why there are two podcasts. The VybeShift Podcast is where we begin with the experiences so many of us recognize in everyday life. Each week we explore a core problem in a practical, relatable way, helping you recognize patterns that may have been quietly shaping your thoughts, emotions, and choices. The Vibrational Stage podcast continues that journey by moving beneath the surface. Rather than focusing primarily on what we're experiencing, it explores why we experience it, examining the beliefs, conditioning, and inherited narratives that often shape our inner world without our awareness. Together, they create one continuous conversation, recognition first, then deeper exploration. Continue the journey. If today's episode resonated with you, I warmly invite you to continue this week's exploration on the Vibrational Stage podcast. You can continue listening here by following the links in the show notes. If you know someone who has been carrying everything, accomplishing everything, and yet quietly wondering why none of it feels deeply meaningful anymore, consider sharing this episode with them. Sometimes the most powerful gift we can offer another person isn't an answer. It's the recognition that they are not alone in what they're experiencing. Closing. Until next time, may you remember that clarity isn't something you have to force. Importance isn't something you have to manufacture. And a meaningful life isn't built by giving equal attention to everything. It's revealed moment by moment when you become fully present for what has quietly mattered all along. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you next time on the VybeShift Podcast.